Today's episode is sponsored by Docket, a frontline operations platform built for mid-market manufacturers and frontline workers to streamline operations, analyze shop floor data, and boost productivity. Visit them at usedocket.com.
Aerospace and defense manufacturing.
Machines and automation.
Additive manufacturing.
Smart manufacturing.
Global manufacturing economy.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals, powered by SME. From the design screen to the shop floor to final assembly, we drive the conversation about making manufacturing smarter by connecting people who are passionate about manufacturing.
Hello and welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals. I'm Amy Bryson, contributing lead editor of Smart Manufacturing Magazine. Today we'll be talking about how to modernize the SMB manufacturing shop floor, which is a great topic for our listeners. And my guest is Brian Ellis, founder and CSO at Docket, an operations platform built for manufacturers and frontline workers to streamline operations, analyze shop floor data, and boost productivity. We're delighted to have you join us, Brian, and welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So before we jump into our discussion, can you give our listeners a bit of background about yourself and the work that you and your team over at Docket are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, I've spent my entire life in the support of manufacturing and things like that. I grew up in a pretty small town in Ohio, so there's a lot of industry around us.
Yeah, I'm in Michigan, so I get you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I always loved that aspect of I'd visit tons and tons of different manufacturers, and you go into these small cities and small towns and things like that, and you can see, the impact that an industry like that really has in growing a community and what it means to those kind of communities. So, in addition to that, my dad, he worked at a machine shop for a while. My aunt was the IT director of Volvo when they had a local plant here. Yeah. So,
wow.
I guess it was by destiny. My brother's also does a manufacturing software startup, so it's kind of in the blood, I guess. But
yeah, you had a definite roadmap ahead of you.
yeah, exactly. I didn't realize it, but then I turned back around, and it's been I started doing manufacturing technology consulting in 2002. So I had co-founded a consulting company called ZeroLogic. And what we would do is go into different manufacturers and, learn about the way that they did manufacturing, what really set them apart from their competitors, what was unique about them and how they could use technology to do that better, and to do those kind of shop floor things better. And, worked with hundreds and hundreds of manufacturers over those years. And, what ended up starting Docket was a combination of things. And one was really looking at those shop floor employees and seeing that in a large way, they're getting left behind in the technology revolution. Through my existence, I started on the internet very early, dial-up modems and things like that. And, all the way through smartphones and, Chat GPT, somehow doing magic and answering questions for you. And, so I've seen a full revolution of what technology means to my regular life, but and especially in these mid-sized manufacturers or small to mid-sized manufacturers, you just didn't see that. There's still paper everywhere. There's still manual processes. And there's huge benefits to be gained out of it. And
well, that's so important. Sorry to interrupt you. It's so important because, a lot of what we talk about is related to small and mid-sized manufacturers and helping them see a better way than, Post-it notes and Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah. When I was a consultant and, we were doing ERP work and things like that, there's always a joke that ERP stood for Excel replacement product. Not true by a lot, but it was always well appreciated, at least. But yeah, because it was prevalent. That's how business was done. Excel, sometimes Access databases, a lot of paper, and that's just so you can look at that and see okay, we have changed so much, and even the front office of those same manufacturers have changed so much in terms of the technology they had, but in the hands of those shop floor employees, it just wasn't getting there. And so we looked at it and we're like, okay, instead of going, company by company and things like that, what if we focused our efforts on building a platform that was really oriented toward, both collecting all of the information that the organization needs, like the company, like what the ERP needs and things like that, but it's actually built to be a useful tool to those shop floor operators. And that was kind of the foundation of it, and where we went from there.
Wonderful. So you talked a little bit earlier about spending countless hours working with different manufacturers to kind of take the Lego apart and put the pieces on the floor and see how it all went together. In your experiences, what are the biggest differences between like a mid-market enterprise shop floor and a small shop floor?
Yeah. And I love this part of it. Like, this was always my favorite part. I tell people, like, the shop floor tours where you're, where you can walk around and see how all of these things are done. I mean, I grew up watching like how it's made, so I had like a huge passion for that. And, and it's interesting because like for those small, especially for like the small manufacturers, they're for a long time, like they survived by being very, highly differentiated. And that could be geographically, like supporting other manufacturers in the region and supplying parts and things like that, or a focus on like a really specific process or product. And, so that was important to them. I would also say, everybody had to wear a lot of hats. The bigger the organization, the more specific people could be in terms of what they're doing. But, it was always one of those things that, if I put on the glasses of the future and I'm like looking into the future of manufacturing, that I was always worried about, like, my entire time was focused in like that small and mid-sized space. Like I never really got into the enterprise space, or like, the really large manufacturing or anything like that. And like I said, you see these towns that are built on these like small manufacturers and things like that. And as we move toward automation and as we move toward, technology being a bigger driver for manufacturing and for overall productivity as that market continues to shift that way, I've definitely got some concerns for that like small and mid-sized space about how you stay competitive. And, so when I don't want to like hear everything, but when we built Docket, it was like, we saw there was so much technology that was getting made for the big producers that were out there that could afford, millions of dollars of licensing and, multi-year implementations and things like that, because they would benefit from the productivity gains out of it. But that wasn't happening in that small and mid-sized space. And you could see those differentiators evaporating. Automation means that more, other larger companies could offer more differentiation in their product, because that kind of automation gives them additional flexibility to go after markets that maybe were too small for them before. So that's definitely, I think when I look toward the future of manufacturing and when it comes to like technology and what it means and automation, I see two different things. I see peril, where you could have a lot of consolidation of these small manufacturers and things like that by either private equity or, just by larger companies. But at the other side of things, I see like a future where automation can cause a lot of re-onshoring of manufacturing that we may have lost at some point in time, because the cost calculations end up being a lot different.
Yeah. So while many smaller manufacturers have been able to digitize other parts of their operations, from your perspective, why has the shop floor lagged behind?
Yeah. I think there's kind of a lot of reasons for that. Like, one of them that I looked at first was, or one of them that I would point people toward is like, the students coming out of like those California universities and things like that, and like the VCs and all of that, like they weren't around manufacturing, so you didn't see these massive, successful startups getting started up. They were oriented toward what the needs of manufacturing was, because they didn't know, because they weren't around it and things like that. So, there was definitely that. I think that it took small and mid-sized manufacturing, and they're not all there yet, but to start recognizing that the purpose of IT is not to keep the computers on, that IT can also represent a strategic advantage to a company. And, bringing IT into the boardroom and, taking those things into serious consideration, which also means that those IT professionals have to, evolve into business people as well. So, I think you saw a little bit of that. There was a culture lag that was going on there. There was a lot of, we've always done it this way and we've always been successful, without recognizing that, as technology increases exponentially, that, you can't keep that moat. It's going to get bridged as the technology just overwhelms you eventually.
It's an interesting evolution because in a lot of other industries, technology became the way business got done. But for some reason, manufacturing has always kind of been behind that curve. But with, everything becoming so much more user-friendly, it's an interesting conversation to continue about dispelling the myths of complexity that has to do with, digitalizing a shop floor, the types of training that is required for some of these new processes and maybe software-based solutions. What are you seeing and what are you talking to people about as it relates to, their understanding of the complexity or maybe the relative ease of deployment of newer solutions?
Yeah. And I think, that's a critical piece to it. Technology evolves and solutions evolve and things like that. But, when we were going into this, like one of the benefits that I had was that level of experience that I could look around and be like, okay, software that's going to be used in a manufacturing shop floor needs to be very flexible. Because like I said before, like each of these manufacturers have something that's a competitive differentiator for them that made them in business. Like, I don't want to erase that by putting generic software in there and be like, hey, everybody's going to follow the same process. This is the best way to do it. Companies have that. So I think that the software needed to evolve that understanding that you're not deploying necessarily just best practices, because what's a best practice for a company that makes one part every 5 months and a company that makes, 10,000 parts a day, or they're going to be very much different. But, there was definitely a lack of that. And the other thing, I would joke around with people all the time, but, if you go onto the shop floor and you look at the technology that those people are using, a lot of times, one is it brings no value to them. They're doing some data capture and things like that, but it's not really making their job better. And two, I would say a lot of times, I don't know if the people who wrote that software have ever actually interacted with the shop floor employees, because it's there's menus and buttons and, terminology and everything's all over the place. And it's simple, make it simple and make it useful. And, because people would always talk about that, change management. We'd go through all of these things about change management and things like that, about how to manage it, which you do have to. But a part of change management should be listening before you make the change to what they need, and then, making it so they want to make that change by making it useful and easy.
Help them see how it will make their jobs better, their work life better. Yeah, that's an important piece of that. I think people skip to implementation and kind of push down solutions and say, well, you better get on board. But a lot of these things can really rally positive momentum and excitement about better ways to do things.
Yeah. And I see that there's a lot of misconceptions, I think, about, manufacturing shop floors generally, and more importantly, the people who work there. There's kind of this oh, they're just there to punch the time clock, and I've interacted with tons and tons and tons and tons of these people that are on the shop floor. And what I see are people who care about their work, and a lot of times, as long as the company cares about them, they care about, they want to do a good job. I believe that there's a natural state where, most people want to do a good job. And, if you support them and give them the tools, like they're going to do their best as they get into there. So, there's kind of that piece to it where, a lot of people just think like, that you have to put all these guardrails in place because otherwise, they're just going to do whatever. And the other thing I think, that I challenge for people who, especially if you're writing software for manufacturing companies or for shop floor employees in particular, like to think about is like, if you're doing that job 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year or whatever it ends up being, it's easy. That's a lot. So little annoyances are a big problem because you would hate it. If I'm using Word and I try to drag an image around and it reformats my entire page, I'm like, I can't stand this. And then imagine that's like, you have to do that every day. That's like, that's torture. So
it is death by 1,000 paper cuts. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So really focusing on making something that's useful for the for the people who are doing the job, and then understanding that their job, and nobody's going to be perfect. And as much as you can do to provide solutions that help them do their job, I think they appreciate it. And I think that they end up, they're more satisfied, and the organization is going to be more satisfied with their performance.
So practically speaking, what are some of the first steps a small manufacturer can and should take to start modernizing its shop floor?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a lot of, this sounds pretty obvious for a lot of people, and hopefully companies are doing this. But like, the first thing that I would do is, I generally, like, if I'm going to do a shop floor experience, I would focus on following the material through the process. So I started receiving and ended shipping, and I would go department by department, and I would learn about what they do, and because there's so many times that I would see the smallest things that could have a huge impact on people. It'd be like, a company would be like, well, one of the things we want our employees to do is to take a photo of this shipment before it goes out. And then you'd watch their process, and like, they'd get a digital camera and they'd like go and they'd take a photo, and then they'd put that, the camera into their computer, and then they're dragging these files and they're creating folders and they're doing all of this. And it's like, there's so much time waste on doing that. And it's like, okay, those are easy things. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can address there to gain immediate productivity benefits without being, too revolutionary. Like, that's one of the things I talk to companies about as well, is like, don't try to be revolutionary in your processes, try to be evolutionary. Because otherwise, there's so much planning, and you're planning these major shifts and things like that, and you can spend years of not getting the productivity gains just by, trying to plan and figure this out and do this like major overhaul, versus like really looking at your processes and seeing like, okay, where can we start? And then once you get it started, then it's easier to continue. It's continuous improvement. It's not a one time I'm going to do a whole bunch of improvement and then I'm never going to look at it again.
Yeah. So let's say managers and leaders have taken the step that you talked about earlier, and they've gotten initial feedback from those frontline workers and shop floor workers about what is a pain point, what they'd like to see better, and they've made some investments in technology. So how can managers then help drive the adoption of that new tech on the shop floor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for one, the first process drives the second process. So, the first process involved listening to what people actually needed. And then when you come to them and you say, hey, here's a solution to the problem we talked about, like the employee's going to see that. They're going to see that you actually heard and that you put effort into solving their problem. And I think that's huge. The other part about the other part of that, and this can be those people, is identifying like, okay, who are your champions, who might be a little bit more tech savvy, and really engaging deeply with them so that they can be, your representative on the floor as you roll technology out. They can help answer questions, do all that kind of stuff, sell the benefits of it, and things like that. So, really trying to engage people on it. And then after you get the technology in the hands of some people, I always like doing, if we can, like slower rollouts, like roll in one department, get feedback, iterate, and then continue to grow onto it. That way you can, it gives you a chance to kind of shift, and it keeps those communication channels open. It's not, here's software I bought, you guys have to run it. It's more of a constant communication of, what do you need this to do? And maybe not all of that is possible, but we're going to do as much as we can to try to do those things that you need it to do.
Yeah, and it brings up an interesting, point around bridging the work of the old with the new, right? So you talk a lot about the aging workforce with a lot of, institutional knowledge, and the next generation of workers coming in that are more digital natives. And it sounds like, your solutions are really help to bridge that gap and create better collaboration and communication. Can you talk a little bit about any experiences that you've had that you've seen help empower and inspire those shop floor employees, especially as it relates to this whole connected workforce technology?
Yeah. I think that but it's going to be a challenge for a lot of manufacturers to deal with this shift in employment and everything like that. Because what a lot of companies find is that not a lot of their processes are written down or documented. There's so much that's managed, that's tribal on the system, on the floor still. And so losing those people, losing that experience is very, very, very costly for them. So, recognizing that now, like, this isn't a, hey, we can put this off into the future and worry about it then kind of thing. Like, this is a now problem. And I think more and more manufacturers are seeing that and kind of recognizing as they go through there. Providing solutions that are simple, work both for people that are not as tech savvy, as well as people who are tech savvy. I always talk to people about, like, if you pick up your phone and you install an app and you can't figure it out in the first 5 minutes, like, you just go do something else. Like, you're not going to use that app. And that should be that should be the same approach that we have here. And that doesn't, that's both better for me as a relatively technical, as a pretty technical person. And, somebody who maybe isn't as experienced with it. Like, it benefits everybody to have things like that. And then, one of the things that Docket is really about is, like, building processes in manufacturing. So really looking at these things, like talking to those experienced team members and building those processes in so that both are documented, but then also having some process control in there so that, it kind of guides you through the system and says, like, well, you should do this and you should do this. And then here's the tools to do that. That way, we can get into the point now of where we're documenting it, of where we can onboard people faster, where we can remove confusion and things like that as we go through there and get ready for this next, the next tranche of workforce that's coming. One last part I think that, a lot of manufacturers really need to look at or consider is, language barriers, because that's, you're going to have to support more languages and things like that as the workforce continues to change. So making sure that systems that you do are right for your workforce, and it's the truth of your workforce. Like, your workforce may not have English as their native tongue, and there can be a lot of mistakes that happen because you're giving out work instructions that are, that are only in English. And I might miss something that's very, very important, just that gets lost in translation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So let's talk about, while it's not feasible, let's say, for all SMBs to be 100% digitalized and automated, what level of digitalization should SMBs look for to achieve by, say, like, let's give them 6 years, 2030?
Yeah. I mean, based on how the world's going right now, like, hold on. It's like the thing to say, right?
I know, 6 years sounds like holy free holies.
Yeah.
A lot of life's going to happen between now and then.
Yeah. I mean, when like ChatGPT launched and things like that, and you saw the difference between then and now in terms of like AI integration in software, it's shocking amount of change that's happened.
Yeah.
And, in addition to that, like you're starting to see a lot more organizations going into things like cobots and things like that. And so, I think that what organizations should really start doing is like, recognize the strategic advantage of IT, and recognize that you need to have a longer term vision plan that incorporates this technology sooner rather than later. Because if you wait until you need it, it's too late, because you're behind in the market. You don't want to end up behind in the market. So, start going to a lot of shows and, and different technology trade shows for manufacturing and things like that, and see what are people bringing up out there. Like I said, like those cobots, last time I was at a trade show, like everybody has one, it's like Fanuc and people like that are like, they all have their own varieties of it. And that should be to a lot of people from the hardware standpoint, like you should look at that and you should say like, okay, yeah, this is coming. I may not be ready yet, but I should know about the technology and keep an eye on it. So I would start doing that, like, just so you start making that plan, maybe that 6-year plan, like you said. And the same thing, as we look toward like connected workforce platforms and things like that, it's like, how do you provide these digital tools to your employees and get rid of, these, like the paper and different things like that, that's really holding us back. I would start looking at each of these different segments and saying like, okay, maybe the company's not ready yet. But we know that within the next X number of years, that if we don't do that, we're going to be at a very serious competitive disadvantage. And then start investing, and you can start off smallish, like software is cheaper than capital equipment, and software can still have big performance impacts to efficiency and worker productivity and things like that. So, there's avenues that you can take, but I think that you should really look at it and imagine now what you think a company like Toyota or somebody like that is doing in their shop floor, and the kind of technology they're using, and then be like, okay, that's going to become mainstream, and we have to be ready for that. And be very vigilant about keeping an eye out for technology shifts and trends like that, and then invest in it to keep yourself competitive.
Yeah, it's a really good time for smaller manufacturers to explore, have conversations. I think your point about going to trade shows, like I think you guys were at SMX in Pittsburgh earlier this year. And I mean, those are great venues for people to talk and share, and people are really open about sharing what's working, what's not. I think manufacturing is the democratization of technology. People are really open to talk about this stuff and to really explore. And I think having conversations with, like you and the folks at your docket team are important for smaller manufacturers to do now. So like you said, they can prepare and make smart strategic investments and start to put technology as a key business imperative for planning for 2025 and beyond, if they're not already doing that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not, like, you've got some ground to make up already. But yeah, I mean, because like that's the thing is a lot of these people think, that because it happens so fast, like technology is evolving so fast that you can look at it and be like, all of this technology is out of our reach, and that's just not true anymore. Technology that you think might be technology of the future is really technology of the today for you. So hopefully, companies really start doing that and being serious about it, and maybe taking those small steps, like I said, like looking at it potentially department by department, or work cell by work cell, whatever works for that company, but just start the infusion of technology into the shop floor. That way, by the time that we get to those 6 years, like by the time we get to 2030, like okay, we have the technology in there. Like it's already been infused into it. We didn't have to take it all as one bite. We didn't do it on our, off our heels. Like we were strategic. It was on our time frame to change the way that we do it, but we do it in a recognition that the manufacturer of the future cannot be the manufacturer of today. You have to evolve.
Absolutely. Well, we have covered a good bit of territory today, Brian. What else do you think is important for our listeners to know?
I think that is, I think, Amy, thank you. This has been great.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Love any opportunity to talk to people about manufacturing. It's obviously something that I'm really passionate about and built my whole career around. But, the other part of it is so our website is usedocket.com, and, our product is really focused on trying to help companies, like I said, manage those processes. And that could be like a manufacturing process, like how do I run my laser cutter right? And knowing that everybody's going to do the same thing. It's not going to be like, well, depending on who trained you, it's going to be different. It's really about that kind of process control, capturing that and then enforcing those processes while being a better system for those employees. So, what I would say to anybody who, who's interested, like reach out and talk to us. I mean, we're a small company. I've been in this space a long time and I'm passionate about talking about it. So, if you're looking around and you're like, hey, these are the kind of challenges that we're having. It doesn't even just have to be about Docket. I love the opportunity to talk to manufacturers. So please reach out.
Wonderful. Well, Brian Ellis, I want to thank you for taking time to join us and share your valuable insights with our listeners. And I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in, and make sure that you stay up to date about what's happening in advanced and smart manufacturing, and hear more podcasts by visiting us at advancedmanufacturing.org. Take care, everybody.